The rain had begun in the late afternoon, a soft whisper against the weathered windows of the old coastal inn. By dusk, it had grown into a steady rhythm, drumming against the glass as though the sea itself was pressing closer to the shore. The air was thick with the mingled sense of salt, wet wood, and faint smoke drifting from the hearth. Alina sat in the corner of the small lounge, her chair angled toward the tall, narrow window that overlooked the restless water. She had been here for 3 days now, hidden away from the city and all the noise of her life. The innkeeper had learned not to disturb her. She was just another quiet guest seeking shelter from more than just the weather. Her notebook lay open on her lap, though the pages were empty. She had told herself she would write, that she would fill the silence with words, but she had found herself instead watching the storm take shape outside. It was not just the rain that had drawn her here, but the way the coastline seemed to fold around the little village like a secret kept from the rest of the world. No one from her old life knew she was here. No one could. There had been too many questions, too many moments lately where she felt cornered by people's expectations. She had run, not dramatically, not in the middle of the night, but in a quiet, deliberate way. The kind of escape where you leave without telling anyone, where you close the door gently behind you so it makes no sound. And yet, even in her solitude, she carried a strange weight in her chest, a restlessness that neither the sea nor the silence had eased. The door to the lounge opened with a muted creak, and for a moment the sound of the wind outside slipped in. She barely turned her head. Guests came and went quietly here, but she felt it, a shift in the air, like a note struck on a distant instrument, low and familiar. Footsteps crossed the wooden floor, steady but unhurried. She glanced up, and for a breath, the years dissolved. Adrian stood in the doorway, water still glistening in his dark hair, his coat damp from the rain. He was older than she remembered, though time had been kind to him. His features had sharpened, his presence deepened. "Do you still watch storms the way you used to?" he asked, his voice quiet, but carrying a warmth that reached her before his smile did. Alina felt her throat tighten. She hadn't seen him in 7 years. Not since the night they had left each other without goodbyes, their lives splitting in different directions. She had imagined what it would be like if they ever met again, but not here, not like this. For a moment, she couldn't answer. She simply watched him move closer, as if unsure whether this was real or another one of the dreams she sometimes had, where they would cross paths in a city street or at a crowded train station. "I suppose I do," she finally said, her voice quieter than she intended. She gestured to the chair opposite hers. "Sit before the fire burns out." They sat across from each other, the small table between them holding nothing but a pot of tea the innkeeper had left earlier. The firelight threw shadows across Adrian's face, softening the lines and catching in his eyes, which had always been unreadable yet impossibly direct. Their conversation began cautiously. Questions about the journey here, how long they had been in the village, if they were staying long. Each answer was short, almost formal, but threaded with the undercurrent of something left unsaid. Outside, the storm built in intensity. Rain hammered the glass, and the wind began to whistle through the gaps in the old wooden frame. The sound of the sea was louder now, waves striking against the rocks in deep, rhythmic bursts. Inside, though, the air grew warmer, the fire crackling with steady life. At one point, Adrian reached for the teapot, and his hand brushed hers as he passed the cup. It was a small thing, accidental perhaps, but her pulse stuttered all the same. He did not pull away immediately. Instead, the touch lingered for a heartbeat before he withdrew. They spoke of things that did not matter: the shape of the coastline, the taste of the tea, the way the inn seemed frozen in time. But beneath every word lay the memory of what they were not speaking about. Alina found herself studying the way he listened, how his eyes seemed to rest on her just a fraction longer than necessary. She remembered the way he used to laugh, the way he used to look at her, as though he was always on the edge of saying something he never quite said. The hours passed unnoticed, the light in the room shifting as the fire burned lower. The world outside faded to a blur of rain and darkness, and it felt for a while as though they were the only two people in existence. But just as she began to believe in the comfort of that illusion, Adrian leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "Why are you here, Alina?" The question hung between them, heavy and unyielding. She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, the wind outside rose sharply, rattling the windows so fiercely that for a moment neither of them spoke. Her gaze drifted to the storm, but in her chest she knew the storm inside her was far harder to face. The question lingered between them, its weight pressing into the quiet room. Alina's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of her chair, the firelight flickering across her face as she searched for an answer that wouldn't betray everything she had been running from. Adrian's gaze didn't waver. It was steady, patient, the way it always had been when he wanted the truth from her. Outside, the storm roared like a living thing, the windows rattling against a relentless wind. She let her eyes drift to the rain for a moment, as if the dark water and silver lightning might give her words she could not yet form. Finally, she exhaled. "I needed to be somewhere that wasn't my life," she said softly, her voice a thread barely audible over the storm. "I thought if I could just disappear for a while, maybe I could remember who I was before everything became so loud." Adrian leaned back slightly, the fire catching the sharp line of his jaw. "And have you?" he asked. She gave a faint, almost self-conscious smile. "Not yet, but I think I might be getting closer." His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile, but held the warmth of understanding. "Maybe some places aren't about finding answers," he said. "Maybe they're just about giving you a night to breathe." They fell into silence again, but this time it was not awkward. It was a silence that seemed to wrap around them, a quiet they both allowed to settle between their words. The fire popped softly, sending a small ember tumbling onto the hearth. Adrian rose and nudged it back with the iron poker, the movement easy, familiar. When he sat again, the chair creaked under his weight, and the faint scent of rain clung to him. She remembered that scent, not the rain itself, but the way it seemed to live in him, in the wool of his coats, in the salt on his skin when they had walked the shore together years ago. The hours slipped by unnoticed. The teapot emptied and was replaced with a bottle of deep amber whiskey that the innkeeper wordlessly left by the door, as though sensing the kind of night this was. They drank slowly, the heat of fire and the drink mingling in their veins. Their conversation shifted. Small fragments of the past slipped in, not in heavy confessions, but in half-remembered moments. The market in the old city where they had shared their first meal. The night they had been caught in another storm, running through cobbled streets, soaked to the bone, laughing like they were the only people in the world. There was a moment, sometime past midnight, when the world outside ceased to exist. The storm still raged, but it was distant now, muffled by the thickness of the walls. The only light came from the fire, and it painted the room in gold and shadow. Alina's chair had shifted closer to his over the course of the night, without her noticing, and when their knees brushed, neither of them moved away. He watched her with that quiet intensity she remembered, not demanding, not asking, simply seeing her. It made her chest ache in a way that was both familiar and strange. She spoke then of things she had not told anyone in years. The doubts that had followed her like shadows, the choices that had left her wondering if she had strayed too far from the person she was meant to be. Adrian listened without interrupting, his hand resting loosely on the arm of his chair, fingers curling slightly as if resisting the urge to reach for her. When she finally stopped, her voice low and rough, he leaned forward. "You haven't lost yourself," he said. "You've just been caring too much to hear yourself clearly. Sometimes you have to let the world go quiet before you can remember your own voice." Something in his tone, in the steadiness of it, unraveled her. Without thinking, her hand found his. His skin was warm, his grip firm but not insistent. It was not the kind of touch that asked for anything. It simply promised not to let go. They stayed like that for a long time, the fire shrinking to a bed of glowing embers, the rain softening into a steady whisper. At some point, her head rested lightly against his shoulder, and the rhythm of his breathing became the only thing she was aware of. When dawn came, it was slow and pale, a muted light seeping to the rain-streaked glass. They had not spoken for the last hour, but it didn't matter. They had not needed words. Standing at the door, Adrian looked at her for a long moment, as though memorizing her face in this light. "For tonight," he said softly, "nothing else existed." She nodded, her throat tight, knowing that when she remembered this night, she would remember the warmth of his hand, the weight of his shoulder beneath her cheek, and the way the storm had kept the rest of the world at bay. The night they forgot the world. The storm had passed by morning, but its memory lingered in the salt-heavy air and in the way they felt almost too still after such a night. Alina remained at the window long after Adrian's figure disappeared into the fog, her hands resting lightly against the cold glass. The road that wound along the cliffside was now just an empty ribbon of wet stone, glistening under the weak light of dawn. She tried to convince herself that the silence was what she needed, that this was why she had come, to stand in a place where the world didn't demand answers from her every moment. But the truth pressed at her ribs. It wasn't the quiet she wanted anymore. It was the echo of his voice in the firelight, the weight of his hand in hers, the way the storm outside had felt like a wall against the rest of the world. The innkeeper brought her breakfast. Fresh bread, still warm, honey thick and golden, and a cup of black tea, but Alina barely touched it. She sat at the table where they had been hours before, the chairs now slightly askew, a half-burned candle guttering in its dish. She could almost see him sitting there, leaning forward, his eyes steady on hers. It was strange how quickly the mind could take something fleeting and turn it into something that felt eternal. By midday, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the stretch of sea beyond the cliffs. The waves rolled in slow, deliberate motions now, as though the storm had left them weary. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped outside. The air was sharp and cool, the wind tugging at her hair, and she walked toward the path that led down to the beach. She remembered walking here with him years ago, how they had collected smooth stones and pieces of sea glass, keeping them like treasures. That memory rose so vividly that she almost expected to see him waiting at the bottom of the path, his coat billowing in the wind. But there was only the sea. She spent the next 2 days in that rhythm, walking, sitting by the fire, writing in the small leather-bound notebook she carried. At first, her writing was hesitant, but soon the pages filled with fragments of the night they had shared, not in any orderly way, but in bursts. The sound of the rain on the windows, the warmth of the whiskey, the look in his eyes when he told her she hadn't lost herself. She wrote not to remember, for she knew she could never forget, but anchored in a place where time could not erode it. On the 3rd morning, a letter arrived. The innkeeper handed it to her without comment, the envelope heavy, the script unmistakably his. She held it for a long moment before opening it, the paper cool against her fingers. His words were simple, yet they carried the same quiet weight as his presence. Some nights are not meant to be repeated, only remembered. But if you find yourself needing another place where the world disappears, you know where to find me. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her notebook. The sea outside was restless again, though no storm threatened. She knew she would leave the inn soon. There were things waiting for her beyond these walls. But she also knew that something in her had shifted. The night they forgot the world had not solved her life, but had lit a lantern in the dark. And for now, that was enough.